This is my short video. I'm Jennifer Scuro, and I'm talking a little today about helpfulness and helplessness in the time of COVID-19. I'm the author of the Pregnancy Does Not Equal Childbearing Project. I'm also the author of a book called Addressing Ableism. I'll talk a little bit about that in a bit. I'm on Facebook and Twitter, so if you have questions, you want to contact me after you hear this, and you have thoughts, I'm really open to that. Welcome it. So, in thinking about helping helplessness, especially in current conditions, I think we've seen this meme come to mind. It's Mr. Rogers. When I was a boy and I would see scary things in the news, my mother would say to me, "Look for the helpers. You will always find people who are helping." I think it's a really comforting insight, but might be somewhat problematic, because I think there's a lot of ways in which wanting to be a helper or wanting to be helpful is really important, but at the same time, there are a lot of problems that come with receiving help, the ways in which we talk about it. So how we help, but also why we help, I think are really good questions to ask, and maybe I can offer some insights today that I've been thinking about. Especially when it comes to what is not helpful and when is helping really harmful. That line is so important and sometimes so hard to navigate, no matter which side of the equation you find yourself. Can helping be ableist? This is something that I've been really thinking a lot about, in part because of my research in disability studies, and how we have not done a good job in navigating anti-ableist or non-ableist pathways. And so what do I do when I'm helpless? Helplessness, I think, is a question I think is worth asking in a time in which we're asked to do less, to quarantine, to be apart from loved ones. And then finally, how better to think about help, how philosophers can offer or ethicists an insight without a scold, without saying, you should do this and you should do that. I think the kind of ethics I do is usually trying to get around problems that seem to be at a stalemate. So the first question, why help? We assume that helping is a moral good, and I don't think I really want to question that as much as maybe what the implications are of that assumption, which is that when I'm not helping, that can be like a moral failing, like I've failed in some way in not being able to help, or that if I need help, in fact, that there's something wrong with me, that I'm in need of help and I'm not helping in some kind of ways. So the philanthropic model, I would argue, is the kind of person who comes and can help everyone and never needs help. And that we see all over our culture. I call that the philanthropic model, the what I'll later call the Bill Gates model, where I have all these resources and all this access to knowledge, and what I do is I discretionarily give that help as I see fit. That in our culture is a moral success. We treat that as a superhero level of helping, and I find that dangerous. And I'll try to follow up with that. I argue it's a mistake. So how to help? One, helping is a verb, not a noun. Well, I think if we don't attach it to people, I'm helping, I'm a helper, I think that might help in us thinking through it a little bit better. And then, of course, thinking of it as a judgment, as a practice of judgment. You have to decide in real time what counts as help and what help would really look like. Requires knowledge and experience and habit, but I think most importantly, helping requires constant correction. We need to be open to the idea that, like, at some point, if you are helping and you stop helping, that to correct that habit or knowledge in some kind of really meaningful, real-time way. And of course, we assume that the maximum effect of help is that we're not harming, right? So that's where we see ourselves in a kind of crisis situation in which someone who's in the best position to help ends up providing a harm, because the way in which they help is not an appeal to good judgment, it's an appeal to power, right? So I'm in a position of power, I should tell people what they should do, and I'm helping them, right? So you should be grateful for my help. And of course, this is the famous scene in which, sorry, I couldn't help bring up poor Dr. Fauci, who has to face palm because of the degree to which something that is intended as help is in fact harm. So the harm question when it comes to help, I think emerges out of a false binary, which is there is the one who helps, who's independent, It's a morally rewardable position. In other words, I'm the good guy. And of course, it's politically and economically advantageous. Usually comes from a place of privilege in which I can provide help to others, but I don't require any help. Of course, that means on the other side of that binary is there's one who needs help. They become the dependent, they're morally suspicious or deficient, you need help. And of course, politically and economically precarious. You end up not getting the things you need or always requiring. Sometimes what makes it really kind of awful and ableist, as I'll talk about, is the idea that there are special needs for people with disabilities. Like they require special forms of help. I think what that does is it permits a whole level of paternalistic advice. You probably already yourself have that experience where someone thinks you need help and they, in a most condescendingly way, you know, kind of tell you how you should proceed. And that's supposed to be helpful. Good intention whitewashes what can be harm. So in other words, when somebody's well-intended and they're in a position of privilege and they mean it in a kind of neutral way, this is advice you would give anybody, or this would be help you would give anyone. Very often it masks the kind of underlying, not only paternalism, but then kind of further complicates it by making it about good intentions. But I meant well. And then of course, the market has skewed this completely so that asking for help doesn't come across as need of aid and assistance. That becomes a question of justice. It becomes like you're not doing enough to require that kind of help. And of course, we're back again at the same place we were before, because just recently, and I think a lot of people are grappling with this, is this idea that a freestyle form of advice comes in this, you know, maybe disinfectants can be a form of help to help the, you know, conquer this war we have with this virus. So a deeper aspect of this is to attack the question of ableism as it relates to the helping binary. What happens in a lot of disability studies work and advocacy, and I cite Rachel Cohen-Rottenberg in my book Addressing Ableism, because the idea is that when you're helping, you turn the person you're helping into a help object. In other words, it becomes about you and it doesn't become about actually helping them, especially when the person's put in that position of being objectified. I help the needy, I help the poor, I help the disabled. That really objectifies that work of hero help, the philanthropic model. And again, Bill Gates right now is stepping up and accumulating resources and the best researchers, and he's an armchair expert in virology right now. And again, we become dependent on him as a society because the person who is in power is non-expert and in fact harmful in his advice bearing and leadership. So there's a false moral success in being the superhero and not in this idea of surviving the virus, and no matter how much help one needs. Can we do any of this in good conscience? I don't know. I mean, I think I appeal to a Levinasian ethics, Emmanuel Levinas, a philosopher, who talks about this idea of small goodness without witness. Ethical substitution is that one is always for the other in an infinite amount of responsibility. I can't say that this ethics is an easy ethics. It definitely complicates the question of help. So the best I can do is maybe provide some insights into the particulars of today. That includes helplessness. I think there's something really insightful about when the people who are in the best position to help find themselves helpless. They're at their limits. They don't know how to act or to judge or to use their discretion and their tools to be able to provide the assistance that they're meant to provide as a profession, as a calling. Again, this is Alexandria Macias, who is a nurse, and she says, you know, here I am taking care of them and sedating them, but their phone is still ringing. They can't be in contact. Again, working in an intensive care unit right now as a nurse, I taught medical ethics for years to nurses specifically, and no training prepared them for being able to navigate the kinds of things they're asked to do with this kind of pandemic. And so helplessness becomes, for me, a pathway in to understanding the depth of the ethical dilemma we're all in. This is the myth of Sisyphus, a kind of a graphic image there of a black and white silhouette. Um, and my friend Devanya Havis at Kinesis College, a professor in philosophy, likes to refer to this image and always thinks of, and I can't help thinking along with her on this image, that there's this non-movement in terms of no matter how much one does, one is always at risk of it all coming apart. So this is a novel virus and a novel form of helplessness. I think when people are far away from their loved ones, or their loved ones are suffering elsewhere, and you cannot provide any kind of help to them, you cannot provide any aid or assistance, I think that helplessness is its own form of suffering. So I want to validate this idea that this virus is doing something different in a way that we have to ask new questions and really think about it in new ways, and kind of understand how helplessness as a suffering needs its own concern. We need to address it in a very specific way. How? Care communities, the disability advocacy and writers and advocates have done an excellent job in talking about what care communities look like in real time, how they learn how to distribute out resources, how infrastructure becomes really important in care communities and sustaining them. A sustained kind of, it's not about the individuals performing tasks of help, but about the kind of access and the kind of stability of resources as one needs. And then, of course, communication, being able to write to refuse, to say, no, I don't want your help, or it helps at one time and it doesn't help at another. So finally, I leave you with the important insight of consent when it comes to help over paternalism. Do you need assistance is so much more open-ended as a real form of potential help than something like, here, let me help you, because it always understands and implies that right of refusal without it being objectionable. The goal of helping, I would argue, instead of going back to that do not harm, that there has to be a notable prosthetic effect. In other words, it really provides some kind of relief, something like medicine. When you have a terrible headache and you have the right medicine at the right time and the right dosage, and you have access to it, and you don't have to pay for it, that you don't have to parse it out to make sure you have enough. There's real relief, there's real prosthetic effect in having that kind of proper and timely care. So I think when it comes to helping, we have to come back to, is it creating a prosthetic effect in that effort, in that resource? Assistance and aid requires, again, that infrastructure and distribution of resources. I can't say enough how we see this unevenness in who's getting help and how they're getting help and what we have access to and we don't. Again, it's created a kind of crisis of helplessness. Parents becoming teachers and caretakers, caretakers not being able to take care of those that they love. This is a real form of relief that needs to come with the idea that helping, one can't be a superhero, one has to survive. And then finally, reporting care correction and listening to the ways in which care needs to be corrected, that sometimes certain forms of care aren't working, I think is a really important new strategy we need to kind of institutionalize, or at least talk about more as a culture, as a society, if we're to come together and counteract some of the ways in which a very paternalistic model of help and care, ableist at the highest levels of power. We need to flip the script. And I hope this talk today might have helped you get some insight into what's going on. And I hope to keep thinking about it in this way.